Okay, let's just pause for a second to take that in. So you're saying that, in a sense, Europe's proxy border guards were these nasty Janjaweed paramilitary forces known for war crimes and genocide.
I am saying exactly that.
I mean, I'm just in a state of shock to hear you say that this is worse than the situation was in 2003, 2004, the early 2000s.
20 years ago, during the first war in Darfur, the main, it was a story of burned villages. Now it's a story of burned cities.
Welcome to the IJ4EU Podcast. I'm Timothy Large.
And I'm Melissa Militic.
And we're both from the International Press Institute, where we have the pleasure of running the IJ4EU Fund, which supports cross-border investigative journalism in Europe.
The clue is in the name, IJ4EU, Investigative Journalism for Europe.
Today's episode takes us almost 1,000 kilometers away to Sudan. And this is a story that's going to connect the dots between the European Union's obsession with migration and the ongoing conflict in Sudan, which is now threatening to spiral into a civil war. And to talk about this, we have two very special guests, and we'll introduce them in just a minute. But first, at the risk of keeping our guests and also our listeners waiting, I just wanted to very quickly reflect on the fact that quite a few of the investigations supported by IJ4EU recently have actually taken us outside of Europe to far-flung places. I think that's a notable development.
Yeah, that's exactly two things that I noticed is like when you look at all the investigations and projects supported by IJ4EU Fund, it's just so obvious that these stories are truly cross-border. Corruption, migration, climate, environmental issues, pollution, they simply do not stop at the border. Bad guys don't stop at the border. And for that reason, investigative journalists themselves do not stop at the border. They have to travel sometimes really far to cover that story and to bring it to European audience.
Let's not keep our very patient guests waiting any longer. We are thrilled to be joined by two journalists whose work really does take them across borders to distant places. And they've worked on a really fascinating investigation, which is titled The EU's Pact with the Devil. One of the journalists is Gwenaëlle Lenoir, who started... Hello there. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're quite frequently in Africa. You've been supporting on Sudan for many years.
Yeah, I'm covering East of Africa. I'm covering Middle East and East of Africa for so many years. And of course, my problem now is that I cannot go to Sudan anymore for the moment because of the war. So the entry in Sudan is forbidden to journalists, foreign journalists. So it's one of my problem, I'd say.
Indeed. And as I'm sure we'll discuss, it's a problem that must have impacted this investigation and just access to Sudan. But it's great to have you on the show.
And we also have Patricia Huon.
Hello.
Patricia is a bit less visible, I would say. The camera is off. But Patricia is experienced journalist reporting from sub-Saharan Africa for more than a decade. She regularly reports from Sudan. She covers migration. She is a freelancer, and she often writes for the New Humanitarian. Hi, Patricia. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
I want to say nice to see you.
Yeah. Nice to hear you.
Nice to hear you.
Technical issue. I'm in South Africa at the moment, where I've been living now for 14 years. And I'm in Port Elizabeth, which is by the coast.
Appreciate both of you taking time to talk a little bit about the recent investigation you've done about Sudan. It's a story that connects, as I said, the European Union with a former Sudanese dictator and a current warlord with presidential ambitions. Where on earth do we begin with this?
Okay, first of all, I would like to to precise that Sudan is that Europe, EU, is quite obsessed by Sudan on the migration topic. Because of what? Because Sudan is a country of transit for people coming from all North Africa to Europe. I mean, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, to Europe. They cross Sudan before reaching Libya. Okay, it's also a country of departure. Because Sudan is, unfortunately for this country, is it's a very poor country, and it's a country who knows wars for decades now. So I discovered this obsession. I mean, a few years ago, and I discovered that after the Valette summit in 2015. EU decided to help to support the Sudanese authorities, Sudanese government at that time, to stop migration. At that time, the Sudanese authorities were held by a guy called Omar al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir is one of the, let's say, best dictator around the planet, and is indicted by the International Court for genocide. So I discovered that EU was supporting a guy indicted of genocide, which is quite a problem, I mean.
In order to stop migration, obviously, because that's always been like one of the main issues. Like even when we were there in Sudan, like talking to diplomats based there at the time in Khartoum, there were 2 points that would come back very often. It was like fighting against radical Islamism and terrorism, which also like Sudan can be an important country for, and migration. So basically Europe, and that started, as Gwenaëlle said it, from the time of Omar al-Bashir, started to close their eyes on whatever the regime was, as long as it could help Europe not having too many migrants going through Sudan, and also, the fight against radical Islamism.
I just want to back up for 1 second to kind of put Omar al-Bashir in perspective, because just for some of our listeners who may not be too familiar with this, you mentioned genocide. You mentioned that he was indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity and genocide. And some of our older listeners may remember back in the early 2000s when Darfur in Western Sudan was very much in the news, and the word Darfur and genocide almost became synonymous. Bashir was very much the dictator who presided over a war in Darfur with some pretty nasty characters who were known as the Janjaweed, weren't they? Mm-hmm. They were mostly recruited from nomadic tribes in Darfur and the region, and they did some terrible things. And from their ranks, these paramilitaries that were kind of acting as proxies for Khartoum formed the so-called Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. That's the kind of the backdrop.
Yeah, because you mentioned the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed were led, and they are still led by a guy who's called Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, and this guy is known also with the nickname of Hemedti. Hemedti is one of the two warlords who are really destroying Sudan since April this year. So these Janjaweed have been used by on the behalf of Europe, actually, have been used by Omar al-Bashir as border guards. So they were in charge of stopping migration. on behalf of Europe.
Okay, let's just pause for a second to take that in. So you're saying that, in a sense, Europe's proxy border guards were these nasty Janjaweed paramilitary forces known for war crimes and genocide.
I am saying exactly that. Omar al-Bashir put this Janjaweed in charge of the border. And by putting this Janjaweed in charge of the border, Janjaweed or RSF, if you prefer now, the same guys anyway, by putting them in charge of the border, that Omar al-Bashir put them in charge of stopping migrants. And it was on the behalf of Europe. It was with the technical support of Europe. Some people in Sudan say it was even money support, but we don't have any evidence of that. So it's an indirect support from Europe to RSF, but it's indirect, but it's a real one. I mean, RSF wouldn't be this military armed force today if it had not the support of Europe before. And the diplomatic support also, because Hemedti has been, hosted by all the European ambassadors.
I think we have to go back a little bit, like, to understand how it reached that point. So what happened is that, like, under the regime of Omar al-Bashir, there was a rebellion in Darfur. And as Bashir did with other rebellions too, like including in South Sudan before the independence, he basically led like a proxy war. So he armed those Arab nomad militias to fight his war. And obviously they had their own interest also, because they were long-time conflicts for, land, access to resources, power, whatever. And that's how it led to the Janjaweed and massacres and rape and villages being burned. And then still under the regime of Bashir, the Janjaweed somehow, because they led this war and also because they gained in power, they started to obtain some more official functions. And one of them was actually guarding the borders. I mean, those guys, they know the desert. That's where they're from. The area like between Sudan and Libya, that's where they thrive. The desert, it's their place. And so Europe was asking Sudan to stop migration, then kind of pretending not to know, let's say. It's like, okay, we're not dealing with the Janjaweed, as they still kept on saying for years afterwards when the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, became more official. And it's like, no, we're not financing them directly. We're not dealing with those guys. But then who's in charge of the border? It's them. So how can you say you're not dealing with those guys if they are the ones doing the job that you want to be done?
But sorry for jumping in. How does that actually work? This pact with the devil, the agreement. What did Europe commit to? What do we get? What do we give? Are we talking about the money? Are we talking about equipment or training? What is the plan? How exactly do they expect the migration to stop?
Okay, there is a body who has been decided in the La Valette summit. It's called Khartoum process. Through this Khartoum process, you have exchange of information between Sudanese authorities, Horn of Africa police, and Europe. You have Interpol, for example, inside this Khartoum process. So you have exchange of information, you have training, They provide also equipment like computers, for example. And of course, for example, Europe says, okay, the computers, it's only for finding out the false documents. All right, but again, when you have migrants transiting through Sudan, they don't go through airport. They go through the desert. So it's not the airport. The airports are not important. I mean, the training is not for the airport, or if it is for the airport, it's just a very, very, very tiny aspect of the cooperation. And so again, we don't have any evidence about money. A lot of people told us about money in Sudan, but we don't have any evidence of that. But there has been some training. There has been technical cooperation, and through a body which is called EU Trust Fund for Africa. And the problem with this EU Trust Fund for Africa is that it's not clear at all. And all the people we interviewed in European Parliament told us that they didn't succeed to have the clear information about the use of the money of this EU Trust Fund.
It's also, besides financial support and technical support, which did happen, like there have been trainings, even training about human rights, but like if you are training some units who have been accused of massive human rights abuses, then isn't it still problematic? But then beside that, it's also about the rise of Hemedti himself.
Well, let's talk about Hemedti for a minute. And again, just to bring things up to date here. So this Khartoum process that you mentioned was with Omar al-Bashir. But of course, in 2019, he was deposed in a coup d'etat. And the man who takes power at that time is General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who today leads the National Army. And several years later, so bringing it right up to date to 2023, this year in April, as you say, fierce fighting breaks out. And that's between the Sudanese army and the Janjaweed, the RSF. And this devastates Khartoum, it creates chaos in Darfur again, and it threatens to plunge Sudan into civil war. Now, Hemedti is as the leader of the RSF, is essentially at war with General al-Burhan it's a power struggle, isn't it? That's what's going on right now. So to what extent is Hemedti a man created by Europe? Does Europe have any blame for his role in all of this?
You definitely cannot say that Europe built him at all. But what happened, and there's also, and I think it's important to mention, like there's no good guy in the story. Like the General al-Burhan is leading the national army is not either clean of any abuses. So, but Hemedti was like the second person in ranking in the council that was leading Sudan, and what happened is that he was basically received by all European diplomats in place in Khartoum, and not only European diplomats, American and the UN, and so. Actually, I was speaking with a Sudanese journalist when I was in Khartoum last time, and he was saying they basically treated him as a head of state, like on the same rank than Burhan, who was, well, he was the first ranking guy, but he wasn't either officially elected or anything. But like, so the diplomats definitely treated Hemedti like someone who really mattered, and he did. But so it was like, okay, we're meeting Burhan on one side, we're meeting Hemedti on the other side, because we need to know what he thinks. And Hemedti, from people who know him or what is being said about him, is someone that is looking for recognition. He's been looked down at by previous regime, by people in Khartoum who see it like a herdsman, basically like a guy who was just taking care of camels in the rural areas, not sophisticated, to speak Arabic with an accent. And so the fact that he was given that status, somehow, we are convinced that he contributed to making him believe that he could be that person and lead Sudan.
So again, the European Union has some blood on its hands for a sense of legitimizing a guy who's essentially a terrible warlord, to the extent that he believes he could be president of Sudan, is leader of Sudan. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. What happened when during the revolution of 2019? What happened is that both Burhan and Hemedti took the power in place of Omar al-Bashir. Okay, and then, as Patricia said, there's no good guy in the story. What happened is that Hemedti succeeded to make part of the people believing, part of the diplomats believing, that he was in favor of the revolution, which was totally false. And everybody could see it. But we think that the Western countries, the Western diplomats, did want to see him as an alternative to the former regime. And what was important also is that he was saying, okay, we stop the migration, and we will continue to stop migration on your behalf. That is something very central. But, European, they're not really proud of this. And so they
I imagine.
Say it,
Well, I was going to ask you, what when you put these allegations to Brussels, to the European Commission, what is the response?
They deny.
Total denial. Right.
They say we don't deal with RSF. We don't deal with them. We don't deal with those guys.
Right.
But of course, even if they don't deal with them in a direct way, they deal with them because they gave support to authorities, to a government, to a state who stopped migration on the behalf of Europe, and who use RSF and Hemedti for stopping them. And we know also that Hemedti and the men of Hemedti, RSF, are part of the trafficking. They're trafficking themselves.
They're part of the trafficking of people to Europe.
Yes. If you speak to migrants, you will see that, if you are stopped by RSF at the border or before the border in the desert, if you pay, you cross.
Well, now it's going to be the same with the Sudanese police or Sudanese custom, or it's like that's just how it works. If you pay, you cross. So,
but the difference is that it's mainly RSF
who's in charge
acting at the borders.
Definitely. And but up to now, because as Gwen said, when she went to speak to people in Brussels, they just denied, no, we don't speak to them. But until today, like with the war raging in Sudan, Hemedti has people touring the world and including European countries. Not only, like also he has people going to other African countries and to talk, like political advisors, communication guys, PR, and trying to change his image and basically portray him as someone who could do good for Sudan. And what we concluded the investigation a while ago, so that's not something I could comment on right now, but I wouldn't be surprised that now in the last few weeks or months maybe, that the RSF in Sudan in the war has been gaining actually more and more territory in the recent weeks, to control of all the major cities in Darfur. So obviously Hemedti is staying relevant because at some point he might be the guy in power in Sudan. And we haven't heard any European countries up to now saying, oh, no, but we're not going to speak to him because he's accused of this or that. Like, for now, it's like nothing official either. Nobody said we are speaking to him, but nobody made a statement the other way either.
I know it's impossible to do any crystal ball gazing, but what do you think's going to happen in Sudan? If you had to place a bet.
Okay, news are very dark, very, very dark. Situation, especially in Darfur, is really catastrophic. I mean, with massacre and war crimes in very large scale. Even more than during the first war in
even more than the first war.
Yes, yes.
And this is a completely neglected crisis. Completely, we never hear about it.
Totally, nobody cares about that. But 20 years ago, during the first war in Darfur, the main it was a story of burned villages. Now it's a story of burned cities. So the scale is really larger. The situation in Khartoum is, the ground in Khartoum is held by RSF. The air is held by the National Army. So you have, I don't have the figure in mind, but you have, I don't know how many millions of people displaced, or many millions of people, refugees abroad. The country is split into two parts. At the east, you have National Army and the former regime, who's back. Regime of the guys of Omar al-Bashir and of the Islamist regime are back. Supported by National Army and backing each other, let's say. On the west and south, it's RSF, and so we are speaking more and more about another split of Sudan. There has been a third split in 2011, north-south, and now we are speaking about a new split in North Sudan between east and west, which is, it's catastrophic.
It is catastrophic, and you must be tearing your hair out at how little attention this is getting from the world. We never hear about Sudan. It's a shame.
It's really a shame because it's Sudan is a major country for the balance of Africa, and as we've seen, as our investigation shows, it's also a major country for the balance of Europe. And on the border, you have Libya. Libya is, there is no state anymore in Libya. So if you have the same thing in Sudan, what will happen in this region and what will happen for Europe? It's very dangerous, not only for Sudanese. Of course, I and Patricia, we know Sudan. We like this country. We like these people. So it's really heartbreaking. But beside that, it's a quite dangerous conflict for Africa and for Europe.
Well, I hope your investigation goes some way towards elevating the profile of this neglected emergency in the world press.
I also reported when I was in Chad for the New Humanitarian about the humanitarian crisis, basically, and how NGOs are completely overwhelmed by the number of refugees and the lack of interest and the lack of funding. Like WFP, the World Food Program, is saying, like, just right now that they can feed people until the end of the year. And it's already really, really not enough. Most people I met when I was there in September had received only one ratio of food since they arrived. It's malnutrition is terrible among children. And WFP doesn't know for next year if they can still feed people. It's an absolute humanitarian disaster.
I mean, I'm just in a state of shock to hear you say that this is worse than the situation was in 2003, 2004, the early 2000s, when Darfur was very much on the global on the map. People were very aware of it. There were celebrities doing, all kinds of campaigns for Darfur. What a difference today. What an incredible silence we have here. Do you think that the what's going on in Israel, Gaza with Hamas, is that distracting from it, or is there just how do we explain this?
So probably, but not only. Anyway, I think that our task as journalists is to investigate, to continue to investigate about this country, about what's happening there, about what's happening in Darfur, because contrary to what happened in 2003, we have a lot of videos, a lot of materials. We have testimonies, we have videos, we can investigate. And some Sudanese organization, international organization, are collecting evidences of those massacres. And we have to show this. We have to work on this. We have to show this. We cannot stay silent about this. That's what we want to work with Patricia on. We have to continue to work on Sudan.
Because there's a total blackout, obviously, because no international media are allowed. There are some Sudanese journalists who, very, very bravely still manage to do some work in Darfur, but it's incredibly dangerous for them. And even getting the information out is difficult as well for lack of proper communication. NGOs, the UN, they manage to organize a few missions, a few convoys, but it's very, very limited. So there's basically no one to witness what's happening there.
It's an extraordinary story. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our time here, but thank you so much for telling us about it. It's certainly opened my eyes, and congratulations on the work you've done, despite the very difficult challenges of reporting on Sudan right now. So unless there's anything else you'd like to add or any questions you have, Melissa.
I just wanted to wish you good luck with chasing and covering the devil and the pact made with him.
No, and obviously we also wanted to thank IJ4EU, because without that it wouldn't have been possible to do that investigation.
Yes, it's very important to have time to investigate, and time, as everybody knows, is money. So it's important to have the support of IJ4EU, because we have been able to, as we are both freelancers, so it's for us it's not easy to find time, and so it was very important for us.
Well, thank you. We're very glad to hear that IJ4EU could be of help. So Gwen and Patricia, thank you very much, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end. So stay tuned for the next episode of the IJ4EU podcast, coming soon to a streaming platform near you.